Hello and welcome to another pattern recognition video featuring random chess tactics to more closely simulate an actual game. Because in a real game, you don't know what kind of tactics there are or if there are even any tactics in any given position. Okay, so I'm going to try and do 10 puzzles here and pause at any time if you need to think longer. It's black to move here. If we look at the material, we have 4 pawns versus 3, knight and rook, but white has just pushed forward with this dangerous looking passed pawn that's about to promote. Maybe the knight could drop back to cover the promotion square, but the rook is also covering that. So take a look at this. See if you can find the best move for the black side of the board. Remember, when you're looking at things, especially trying to solve tactics or looking at any position in your own games, checks, captures, and threats in that order. Look for checks first, as they are the most forcing. So even though this pawn looks dangerous down here, maybe we have a good check. So hopefully you found the answer. Pause if you need more time. If not, here we go. All right, if we look at checks, we have a rook check here or here, but the king could just capture the rook at both of those locations. Now maybe you overlooked this move, pushing the pawn here, delivering a check. And now the king is very limited as to where it can go. And when the king has almost no moves or no moves, that's when you should really look to see if there's a way to deliver a checkmate. So we push the pawn, checking the king, and the only square the king can go to. And remember, when a king is being checked, he has 3 possibilities or less: capture the attacker, block the attacker, or run. So he can't capture that pawn as it's protected by the rook. He can't block because they're only 1 square away from each other. So he has to run, and the only place he can run to is here. So once the king moves here, do we have a follow-up attack? Well, if you take a look at this, it looks like we'll be able to move the rook over, delivering a mate. And once the rook goes there, there's an interesting pattern that we'll take a look at. But as long as that rook is protected, the rook covers all these squares, but does not cover the other 4. Now, the pawn will cover 1, the knight will cover 1 on this side. Over on the other side, there'll be pawn, and after that pawn moves here, it'll cover the other square. So the rook can cover a T-like area, and then he only does not cover those other 4 squares. So here we go. Check. The king is checkmated by the rook, delivering that T pattern, and all the other squares that the rook does not cover are covered by knight and pawns. All right, on to the next problem. I hope you did well on that one. A queen has just captured a pawn, delivering a check at the same time. So what do we do here? Take a look at this. Now, generally, you want to look at the material first before you make other decisions. So we have 4 pawns versus 4. Bishop and knight versus, or excuse me, bishop and queen versus bishop and queen. But we're in check. So when you're in check, you have 3 options. Remember, capture the attacker, block the attacker, or run. So if we can capture that queen, that would be great. And it just so happens that we can just pick that queen off. So is it that simple? Sometimes there's just a simple solution, a very simple tactic of capturing a piece. So I'm going to say we just take the queen And then that should be winning. So there we go. Well, that was a simple one. It was only rated 570, but consider that work on practicing the basics. Okay. Pawn pushes forward here, attacking our pawn. What can white do in this position? Well, take a look at this. Now, once again, anytime your opponent's king has very few squares that they can move their king to, definitely be on the lookout for checkmate possibilities or stalemate possibilities if you're trying to prevent that in the end game. All right. We have all these pieces around the king, and it usually takes 3 pieces or more. And you can count pawns or not count pawns when you consider 3 pieces. Usually I'm talking about 3 pieces other than pawns, but sometimes the pawns help as well. So here we have an option as far as checks. Push this pawn or push this pawn. Which one of those works better? Well, hopefully you decided not to push this one because the king could still run to here. But if we push this pawn, then the king should be trapped and we have a mate. So there we go. Checkmate in 1 with a pawn. All right. Knight is under attack. So the obvious thing to do would be get that knight out of there unless we have something better. All right, let's look at the material. We have 8 pawns versus what? 8 pawns, 3 minor pieces of, so material is even. What can we do here? What tactic do we have? All right. It looks like instead of worrying about that knight immediately, we have to look for checks, captures, and threats in that order. And if you do, you'll see the queen can deliver a check over here. So that may be a good move. Now, when the king is in check, the 3 options: capture the attacker, block the attacker, or run. We can't capture that queen over there on h4, or white can't. So he'll have to block or run. If the king runs, depends where he runs to. The only option is to go here. We can launch forward with our queen checking. The king would have to run here. And then what? Do we have a good follow-up? Our bishop would be able to deliver a checkmate. So the other option is if this pawn just blocks the queen. But then our knight would be able to capture. All right, here we go. Check. And of course the pawn does block, but we can go there and now grab the rook, and the knight is under attack. All right, on to the next problem. Queen to h5. So getting closer to our king over here. All right. Once again, this great pattern. If you've watched some of these other videos, you may recognize this pattern. If we're counting material first, we could do that quickly. 4 pawns versus 4, rook versus rook, but bishop versus rook. So we're down material of the exchange, bishop for a rook. But we're looking for checks, captures, and threats. And if you do that, you should be able to find the winning answer here. All right. Queen can check from where? Here, 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 or here. which one is best? Well, hopefully you recall this pattern of attacking here with check. The king will be forced into the corner, and then pause for the beginners if you want to see how it continues and figure it out on your own. But then we sacrifice the queen, and the rook will end up mating. So check, then we go to the back rank and deliver a back rank mate. All right, we're halfway there, 5 more to go. Queen has just sidestepped over. We had checked the king there. Now what? Do we have a follow-up attack? We do have a follow-up attack, so hopefully you'll be able to figure this one out. As always, look for checks, captures, and threats in that order. We're behind by what? 2 pawns. And a bishop and a rook. So we need to act immediately. We need to go in for the win here by chasing that king. All right, the only check we have, hopefully you found it, is to move here with the queen. The king will have to retreat to here, and then we can capture this pawn, delivering the mate. So check and mate. All right. On to the next one. The pawn is pushing forward, so this dangerous passed pawn is getting closer here. The rook is guarding that at the moment. But with black to move, what checks do we have? All right. Well, if we look at those checks, the queen could capture the bishop, but the king would just recapture. So that doesn't look so good. But what if the queen just goes here, delivering a check? The king can't block. The king can't capture because the pawn is protecting the queen. So the only option is to run. The king will have to run here. And then we can continue our attack. But what is the best way? We just pick off the bishop, checking again. And that is not quite mate because of this bishop. The bishop could block that attack. But then the knight way over here in the corner comes in to rescue the position and deliver a mate. All right, try and figure that out in your head. Calculate it out if you can. Pause the video if you need to. Here we go. Check, check, and the knight delivers the mate because this queen is pinning that bishop to the king and it can't capture. The bishop is preventing the king from running, and so is the pawn. So as I mentioned before, it takes usually about 3 pieces to deliver a checkmate. Here we have 3 pieces, and the pawn is assisting as well. All right, 3 more to go. What do we have here? Okay. Let's see. Look at the material. 2 pawns versus 4. And, this pawn is looking dangerous. Getting close to promotion. So we need to do something here. And we can. So hopefully you found the answer here, especially if you looked at checks first. How can we check the king here? Well, our queen can move along the bottom rank here, 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 or here. 2 of them, the queen would just be captured. So that square looks good. And remember, once you check the king, 3 options: capture the attacker, block the attacker, or run. And if that can't be done, it's mate. And you can't block when the queen is right next to the king. So can the king capture? No, because our king is protecting the queen there. Can the king run? No. All right, so here we go. And we have a mate. Now this is an interesting pattern. When a queen is protected and checks the king on one of the corner squares around the king, then what happens is the queen will attack through the diagonal. Usually the queen attacks the whole side here, but this pawn, our own pawn, is blocking us, and luckily our king is covering that square. And then the queen covers here as well. The only thing that the queen does not cover are those 2 squares, which white cannot go to the one because the queen's there and the pawn is covering the other. So that's a valuable pattern that I've used quite often when I'm attacking with a queen. All right, final 2 problems. Okay, with the black pieces here, we just have pawns. 5 pawns versus a knight and 2 pawns. So our goal is probably to push one of these pawns to promotion. How do we do that? Okay, this one is very close. If only we could push that there and promote it without the knight just taking it. How can we do that? Well, perhaps we just attack the knight, because we also have to watch out for the king moving up here and covering that promotion square and freeing up the knight. So it looks like, pause the video if you think you need more time to figure it out. And if not, it looks like we can just attack that knight. Now, if the knight goes up here and blocks the pawn from moving, then we can push the other pawn and there are options. The knight will either capture and give itself up. If not, then you can push and fork the king and the knight. All right, here we go. We just attack, and as I mentioned, if the knight moves up here to block, well, then we just start pushing our other pawn, and we're threatening a fork here. So let me put the analysis on for this one before we go on to the final problem. So knight moves here to block, king attacks, and now, if the knight prevents that pawn from moving, we have e3. The best thing according to the computer is to capture. What is the other option? I was looking at this move, but the pawn could still push and promote. If the knight captures, then you can fork the 2 and pick off the knight. The computer says the best thing to do here is that, capturing the pawn on e3. But then after our king captures, there's no way for white's king to stop our pawn. So I don't know, I was looking at this, but then, still you have that move. This is even better. You just go here and wow. If the knight captures now, you can just promote the pawn and it's a mate in 1. So the best thing to do would be to run with your king, but then you're just getting a queen for black. All right, back to the action, the final problem. Here we go. Bishop has just backed up here. What is that bishop doing? Well, it's the white's turn to move, so we need to look at possible checks first. So that springs to mind. But do we have a good follow-up afterwards? If we do that, the king can just run away. To here. And then maybe we can check with our knight. Check. If the pawn captures, oh, then our queen can capture backed up by the bishop. All right, I know that's a lot of arrows, so try and figure that out on your own. Pause if you need more time to think. If you're ready, here we go. Now we jump the knight in here, and the bishop with the queen delivers the mate. All right, I hope you got that one. As always, feel free to leave comments. I enjoy hearing what everyone has to say, especially you. Thank you. Like and subscribe if you haven't already. Have a super chess day.